So we were left with the very interesting question. It was a question that I think was as powerful a question as the zeitgeist involving the cognitive turn. And that is, what does it take to actually enhance a student's ability to learn? Now, when that question came up, there was also another issue that was being raised. And I remember I did one of the first reviews of the teaching reading comprehension at this point in time for the Handbook of Reading and Research with Jim Cunningham. And Jim and I kept on sort of asking ourselves the question, well, where's the research? And we realized that people like Jim and myself who'd spent time in classrooms had basically retreated to doing lab-like studies, hit-and-run type studies, very much like a lot of the educational psychologists who might not have had classroom experience. But why weren't we out there in classrooms exploring these issues, spending the time with teachers, engage with them, formulating different ways to enhance a child's ability to read with comprehension across a range of passages in a fashion that's flexible and adaptable. So many of us began, who were what we would call reading educators, who were also researchers and theorists, began to get involved in what I consider to be a major research surge. A major movement of people like myself into classrooms, working with teachers oftentimes, engage in extended, not these short 1 or 2 day research studies, these extended studies across weeks, months, whole terms, and sometimes years, looking for ways to enhance students' reading comprehension, and also studying whether or not we had achieved what we consider to be the gold standard. The gold standard was, could we show evidence that this student had developed reading comprehension strategies that they could use independently in other situations in flexible and adaptive fashions. The reality was we had very little research that actually had pursued that, looking at that gold standard. And so, along with many people, we sort of said, hey, we should be doing this. And I think there was a major research surge as a result of Dolores Durkin's study, and then many of us looking in the mirror and sort of saying, we need to get engaged in this. And we need to get engaged in this in a fashion that is not these tightly done positivistic type experiments, but in a fashion which was more formative, maybe involving a mix of methods, certainly likely to be or needing to be collaborative with teachers and school personnel, and perhaps with the students themselves, and also assessing what was going on over time and whether or not we had actually achieved what we were striving to, that we could actually show evidence that when we stopped actually the teaching and gave students passages to read where they might use strategies that we had been trying to teach, that they would definitely use these strategies in flexible, customized, adapted types of ways, and it would enhance their reading. So there was, around this period of the 1980s, a major research surge, and the research surge also influenced a range of paradigms that people began to use to study reading comprehension. And many of us were involved in working with schools and teachers, helping them also begin to pull together their own thinking on research on reading comprehension. I remember in particular Dave Pearson and myself were working in a school outside of Champaign-Urbana at this point in time with a group of teachers. It was a part of a project called the Metcalf Project. And we would be working with the teachers, sort of introducing them to these ideas about the role of background knowledge and the strategies. And we were getting teachers in their classrooms to begin to explore ways by which students could actually engage with their background knowledge, see their knowledge change and shift, and at the same time develop strategies. And at first the teachers struggled with it. And I remember I was talking to a person who'd been involved in a lot of collaborative research at this time in the area of writing, Don Graves. And he said, Rob, you've got to embrace these struggles. And embracing these struggles, what became apparent, and it befitted the shift actually, that oftentimes the teachers were focused upon their behaviours rather than the students and what they were wanting the students to get engaged with. And so oftentimes the teacher would be saying, well, this is what I will do, rather than saying, well, this is what I want to get the students to do. When those teachers, and in particular, I remember the teacher I was working with, made that shift to focusing on the students, it was stunning. The extent to which she came up with different sort of ideas and was much more willing to be creative and thoughtful. That shift to that focus upon the students was amazing. And so what we sort of see happening in this research was an emphasis upon, well, we need to learn what's going on with these students as they learn how to learn. Interestingly, when you talk to people who are studying teachers at this point in time, I think they would concur with our experience in the Metcalfe project. They were saying that one of the key shifts we need to make in our teacher research is a shift from treating the task of reading or learning as having students aspire to pull together a basket of facts. Or what we should not be doing is thinking that our goal as teachers is to put knowledge in students' heads. Rather, our goal is to position learners so they are constructing, transforming, organising, and using knowledge. And so they began to sort of really also sort of argue, well, in our studies of teaching, we need to begin to ask ourselves, how are we positioning learners? How are we supporting their constructing, transforming, organising knowledge? And rather than do these observations of teachers' behaviours in us, they started to ask themselves the questions, okay, what does the teacher need to do as they're planning? A unit, a project for the students to read this lection. What types of things do they need to think through, and how are they thinking through ways to motivate the students, ways to engage the students' ideas, and what is it that they bump into? And also, as they are planning, what do they need to do relative to thinking through the knowledge that they're trying to engage students with? And I think most people sometimes sort of think that a teacher is in there just to sort of introduce this is the knowledge on a topic to students. Well, that's not really what teachers are about. They're really trying to get students to engage with the knowledge, if it's history, almost akin to being a historian, or as a scientist, akin to being a scientist. And so there's almost an epistemological consideration that needs to be actually brought into this. I remember I was teaching a class in Australia, and I was expected to do this class in front of a group of university students, and I was given the topic about somebody I knew next to nothing about. It was a Norwegian explorer by the name of Nansen. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I know nothing about this person. How do I actually make this alive for my students so that they get involved in thinking about what this person did in their life, so that they are positioned as learners, and it's not a matter of me giving them the history of this guy which they expected to give back. Well, I have a grandfather who's Norwegian. He's passed away now. But at that time, I remember I called him up and I said, to my grandfather, listen, I've got to give a lesson on this guy who was a Norwegian. Can you help me? Because, you know, I could find this stuff in encyclopedias at this point in time and places like that, but for me it wasn't alive either. And so that this sort of enlightenment, how to animate the knowledge, was a big thing that I was asking. Well, lo and behold, he'd gone to school with this guy. And so he told me what this guy was like, and he told me things about his life story. And it was amazing, the difference it made to me, that then I could actually bring to bear in my introducing this person to my students. I could talk to them about what he was like as a young person, and what drove him, and what were his values like. And it was amazing what that afforded me. And it was part of the sort of the planning. How do I make this relevant for the students in such a way that they're asking themselves questions? Indeed, I think this issue also bears on a topic that I'll get into a little later today, and that is the issue of relevance. And how do we do a better job of connecting what we're doing in schools to students' experiences, including their cultural background. As I sort of said to you, I oftentimes find myself quite frustrated that I've been in schools in Botswana, in Australia, in the States, and I oftentimes wonder, whose curriculum is this? It doesn't feel like mine. It doesn't seem to be drawn from my experience. And so I oftentimes think that maybe there's a bigger project here that needs to be done, and that is asking ourselves the question of what is it that we should be teaching? What are the big ideas? What are the projects? And rather than have a preset set of readers that represent somebody else's canon, maybe that material that they read needs to actually come from their experience. So anyhow, so getting back to teacher research, that issue of thinking about the planning, but also thinking about the actions. And how do we as teachers, and you know, Frank Smith said this in the psycholinguistics book on 12 easy ways to make reading difficult, and one difficult way to make it easy, is how do we actually respond to the child? How do we put the child on the bike and support him? And one of the issues, particularly as we sort of develop students in terms of learning to learn, are we doing that effectively? Is the types of explanations that will empower, is the types of modeling, the things that will empower. I find with technology, you can sort of see it happen all the time. You know, the mistake people make when they're trying to explain to you to do something that you haven't done before, and they do it for you, versus the difference when somebody sort of says, let me show you what to do and you have to do it. You know, simple things like that. But in the context of the curriculum, how do teachers position learners so they're the ones who are being empowered, and they're not empowered to mimic, they're empowered to use this in a sophisticated way, critically, so that they might use it flexibly in appropriate situations again, and adapt it in accordance with the situation. So we're seeing the research surge, we're seeing this sort of shift and sort of thinking going beyond it. Let me now move to talking about what's sort of developed. I'm not sure I'd say we've come as far as I wish we should, but let me give you a sense of some of the developments which took place as we thought about the reading strategies and the ways that the teacher actions that might support this learning to learn.